The Suicide Squad, released last Friday in theaters and on HBO Max. It was directed by James Gunn and stars Margot Robbie, Idris Elba, John Cena, Joel Kinnaman, and Daniela Melchior. The movie follows the Suicide Squad as they are on a mission in Corto Maltese. This review will not contain spoilers, but I will vaguely discuss plot points and shots from the trailer, and make sure to stick around to the end since I will also give a quick, non-spoiler review for The Jungle Cruise at the end. Before I get into that, please remember to like and subscribe, and follow DM Reviews on Twitter, link should be in the description. Also, don't forget to check out Demera Commissions in the Discord server below for great thumbnails, profile pictures, phone backgrounds, and so much more. I've been excited for this movie for a while now. I love both Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and the first one is my favorite MCU movie, so naturally I was excited for this movie. I've also defended the first Suicide Squad movie, and I really don't think it's that bad. One of the things I liked the most was that there were a few good characters, and a couple of those did return, so I was excited to see James Gunn's take on them. I did, however, really not like Birds of Prey, and the main reason being Harley Quinn. She has always been so annoying to me, and I can never understand how she was able to take out so many huge people at once. I'm so happy to say that I adore this movie. It is really good. This movie might be my favorite DC movie since The Dark Knight, and I've tolerated plenty of DC's movies. This movie is so colorful and fun to look at. Every shot is filmed to the brim with color and life, and all of them really pop off the screen. The entire cast is incredible in this movie. I really don't like to say this because I think it is true with most movies, especially comic book movies and superhero movies, but it really feels like everyone who worked on this movie loves and is passionate about these characters. The entire cast and James Gunn care about these characters and making the best possible movie they can with them, and they very clearly succeeded. Is this a perfect movie? No. There are flaws, and I will talk about them soon, but I just want to appreciate how this movie got made. DC gave James Gunn the keys, and they allowed him to take these characters and make a movie that is his take on them. This movie feels like a James Gunn movie, but it doesn't feel like Guardians of the Galaxy. It feels fresh, unique, and innovative, and different, and it makes me so excited for the spin-off show, which is also from James Gunn, and a possible sequel, and for any other movie James Gunn might make. The last DC movie I remember seeing that felt like the studio fully and completely gave the director the power to make their own movie was the Dark Knight trilogy. Those movies felt like Christopher Nolan's unique take on Batman, and this is James Gunn's unique take on the Suicide Squad. Even though, as I mentioned, I usually don't like Harley Quinn, and I still don't, this movie is the most tolerable she has ever been to me. There are still scenes where she is super annoying, and there are scenes where she seems to have superpowers, even though she doesn't, kind of like Black Widow and Black Widow. But Margot Robbie plays her with such humanity, and she is written so well, that there are scenes where I like her. There are, however, many scenes where I once again couldn't stand her, and I don't blame that on James Gunn too much, since he inherited the character. I still wish he did a better job at making her less annoying and more realistic, but there was only so much you could expect because he had to stay true to who the character was. Because she wasn't just in Suicide Squad, but she was also in other movies. Idris Elba and John Cena have a lot of great scenes, and they play really well off of each other. I love how they compared the characters and how they wanted the same thing, but they do it in different ways. And they seemingly showed us why one was right and one was wrong, even though they both wanted the same thing, but they did in different ways. And even though they seem to say which one is right, when you really think about it, they don't take a clear stance, and I love that. The arguments were so thrilling because they didn't make you think either one was right, and I love that. I like that they let you choose who you side with. This movie is rated R, and they use every bit of it. It is filled with very bloody violence, plenty of language, and even more violence. This movie is not PG-13, and I am so glad that the studio let that happen. This movie is not doing too well at the box office, and that may be because of its rating, but that shouldn't change the fact that this movie needed to be rated R. I'm so glad that they put how good a movie would be over how much money it would make. I hope we see more of that in Hollywood, and that companies will let a movie be rated R if it needs to be rated R. Not every comic book movie needs to be rated R. There are plenty that can be PG-13 and be just as, if not even more good. But there are some that just need to be rated R, and I hope that we continue to see studios be willing to allow them to be rated R. I've already mentioned a few, but the characters in this movie are so unexpectedly great and could be the best part. I forgot what his name was, but the shark is hilarious. Ratcatcher, too, I think, is a surprisingly great character. Polka Dot Man is great, like I've heard many critics say. And so many others are such great characters, and they are all great for the same reason. They are written well, and they are acted perfectly. They are all such great castings. Some of them because maybe James Gunn worked with them in the past. Some were just from previous movies, so they weren't going to recast. And others were just new castings. I mean, I don't even know a lot of the actors, and they're all great. One thing that makes this movie stand out amongst other superhero movies is its willingness to kill off so many characters. James Gunn said that there would be a lot of deaths and that nobody was safe, and he was not lying. It is clear right from the beginning that no one is safe. I love that because he establishes early on that anyone and everyone can die, and it adds extra weight to the action scenes, and it makes you treasure every moment you have with these characters because you don't know if it'll be their last. The action is really good in this movie. The beautiful color and the great CGI make it really pop. Most of it is in camera, which definitely helps. The main problem with the action is that some characters seem to have plot armor, which is disappointing considering how many characters die. I know I just talked about how it seems like any characters can die, but there are definitely a few you can tell won't be dying, at least not now. I wish they did a bit more to subvert those expectations, or to do more to lead us to believe they would subvert those expectations, and they just didn't do enough for me. They definitely did do attempts, and some of it did work, but I think there was more that could be done. To me, the place that this movie falters the most is with the villains. They couldn't figure out who the main villain was. They keep introducing new villains, and the story would kind of shift with each one, and it makes the movie feel like more of a three episode miniseries rather than one coherent story, which every movie should be. I thought I would quickly note that the soundtrack is great, although it isn't as good as the Guardians movies. It definitely makes the movie better, but it doesn't add to the movie as much as it did in the two Guardians movies, which I was a little disappointed by, just because I'm like in love with the soundtracks from the Guardians movies, and this one was just like any other superhero movie to me. Well, it's better than most, but it wasn't as good as the other one, so I was slightly disappointed, but it was still pretty good. In conclusion, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad is a vast improvement on 2016 Suicide Squad, and it could very well be the best DC movie since The Dark Knight. I'm going to give Suicide Squad a B+. Now I'm going to quickly discuss my non-spoiler thoughts on The Jungle Cruise. Before I do that, make sure to comment what you thought of The Suicide Squad. And on second thought, Suicide Squad would probably be somewhere between a B+ and an A- to me. I was really having trouble deciding, and it's somewhere there, like a 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 range. So, it's not perfect, but there are problems, but overall it is a great movie, and I'm really happy that it got made. Alright, so now on to The Jungle Cruise. So firstly, Emily Blunt and Dwayne Johnson are really good in this movie. They are easily my favorite part. They're so funny, and they work so well together. The movie tended to slow down when they would go back to the villains. I just wanted to go back to Emily Blunt and Dwayne Johnson and Emily Blunt's brother, well, the character's brother, and they would just keep going back to the villains. And eventually I found them a bit more tolerable. For a while they were just exposition scenes with odd CGI, and it kind of took me out of the movie. I loved there was one scene at the beginning where Dwayne Johnson is giving a tour to a bunch of people, like a jungle cruise, and I loved how there were so many corny jokes which were references to the ride, and I was expecting this to be nothing like the ride, and there were definitely more aspects of the ride than I was expecting, and those are probably my favorite parts. I kind of hinted at this before, but the movie is very funny. The jokes are all very well written, and a lot of that comes from the characters and how well acted it is. My main problem with the characters is that they pretty much all of them lack compelling motivation, but they're acted so well that you kind of give them a pass, but a lot of them's motivations were just very basic, and I wish they could have done more to make to make them more interesting. I would have made the quest more interesting. I was really not a fan of the score in this movie. There were flashbacks that were supposed to be really sad, but they were playing heavy rock in them, and I'm like, no, I want slow and sad music to convey the emotions you want us to feel, but then putting heavy rock music is not helping. This movie is definitely a bit too cliche and predictable. I saw, even if they were twisted, they would reveal to us 2 minutes later. The second they have it, I'm like, oh, yep, I know exactly what that is. And I wish they did a bit more to subvert expectations. There was one twist that kind of caught me off guard, but especially towards the end, it was just so predictable. I was calling exactly what was going to happen, so that kind of disappointed me. One thing that really bothered me about this movie is that a lot of the action scenes are just so hard to watch. First of all, there's shaky cam, but with a lot of CGI, and it's so hard. You can tell what's happening, but you can't tell exactly what's happening. Who is who, and you have a loose idea what's happening, but they could have done a much better job showing what's happening. And even if it wasn't in camera, just less CGI would have helped, and there were just a lot of problems with the action. So I think I'd give Jungle Cruise about a 6 out of 10. It knows what it is, and it does a good job of being that. It's very enjoyable, but I have no interest in rewatching it, and I doubt I ever will. So make sure to comment what you thought of The Jungle Cruise and what you thought of The Suicide